So, when we played Back for Blood for the first time, you and I, we were with two of our friends, right? And you and I kind of had this, like, running joke where I was calling Back for Blood a roguelike, and your response would be, it has roguelike elements. And then another, another event would be, another aspect of the game would be revealed, and I'd be like, that is yet another roguelike element. I guess this is a roguelike, inching closer and closer. And Carlos would just shut me down, and Carlos is the authority on games, and
my side of the coin here was that it was a first-person shooter or like a co-op shooter, something like that. That's what I was saying. Sorry. Go on.
So I just buried my head in the sand. I'm like, you know what? Carlos knows everything about games. I'm just gonna shut up. If it's not a roguelike, it's not a roguelike. I'll just keep joking about it. Like 3 days later, we're all chilling. Carlos says that Back for Blood is a roguelike. Doesn't give me any credit, doesn't reference the previous conversation, so I've waited to this exact moment to bring it up, and that is why Carlos is just filled with embarrassed laughter right now. Carlos, tell me about how Back for Blood is a roguelike. Tell me about the elements, and what do you hate it? Why do you hate it now that you feel like it's a roguelike?
So, it's a first-person shooter, and yes, it's a roguelike, but I was like very much not realizing how much the cards play into it, and I need to take a step back so we just kind of all know what Back for Blood is. Back for Blood, if you're familiar with video games, there's a game called Left 4 Dead, and it's a 4-person co-op zombie shooter where you go through like levels, always trying to run to a safe house at the end of each level. And now Back for Blood is kind of a spiritual successor. The development team has like quite a few Left 4 Dead veterans on there. And so it's come out. It's on Game Pass. We're playing it through Game Pass. We're doing this whole co-op looter, not even looter shooter, but we're doing this whole co-op like shooting zombies or ridden as they're called and all this stuff. And every now and then you get these cards. So like at the start of each level, right, you get these cards that are like, ooh, plus 10% ammo or plus, 10 stamina, or like every time you hit someone, you gain 2 health. And I was like, oh, these are kind of cool. And that was the like, oh, this has like a roguelike element. That is neat. And then the roguishness appeared more as I was playing like without you. The next layer of Rogue to appear was I was replaying the same level over and over again, but with the intent / goal of getting further in a series of levels. Whereas I guess in Left 4 Dead, I knew what the campaign was, and I had access to like all the campaigns. In this game, you need to like push through like every single level from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3 in order to unlock those like following acts. Whereas in Left 4 Dead, you had like No Mercy, Dark Carnival, what have you, all available. Like these campaigns were all available from the start, and you could play them on whatever difficulty. And you weren't replaying those levels to like get better things outside of the game loop. So here's where I will get to it being a full roguelike, where I finally concede the point, is where I am no longer like playing through whatever I want or playing through the game because I have the skill to shoot these zombies and stuff. I am very explicitly getting smacked down by this fucking card progression system. The supply points with the supply lines. The supply lines unlock these player cards that you put into your deck, quote unquote, and you get these cards at the start of every round. So now I need to replay these levels that I already know I can master and have mastered with like the bare minimum cards. I need to replay them dozens of times to get supply points, or whatever you want to call them, to get a currency to then spend to get these like RNG, perk cards. And it just gave me like the whole like, oh, I'm playing Hades, but the roguelike side is not as compelling as Hades, where it's like, here's a really cool, it's like a 50-50 choice of like super cool fucking things that's in Hades. But in here, it's just like, oh, hey, you got a choice of like 3 different supply lines, and all it means is like a card that will like slightly do something, like give you better ammo or make you run a little faster. It's not like, oh, every time I shoot my gun, a thunder strike happens because Zeus is my friend. And I am just feeling like some mighty roguelike fatigue on that one. Like, because I just can't experience like the rest of the content that I want to, even though I am skilled enough to experience it. The game is artificially fucking blocking me, and that makes me mad. Don't put baby in a box.
Oh my gosh. This game has kind of helped me to realize that shooters just don't feel like the right roguelike mashup genre to me. Like, I don't really want those kinds of like the card, like the modifiers, basically. Modifiers are kind of a staple of roguelikes, right? This has modifiers. This has
random modifiers, more or less.
Random modifiers.
And it's on
also,
both
like,
sides, we should say. So like the enemy side will get
buffs,
modifiers.
debuffs.
Yeah, so like the enemies could be like, oh, now the regular zombies, their heads can explode and do AoE damage. Or it's like, hey, we applied a dark mist to the entire level so it's hard to see, versus us as players getting like better stamina or better damage output, something like that.
Right. So the roguelike elements are the same levels every time, right? The
random modifier, or random mutators, I guess we could call it, the mutations
Sure.
of the gameplay.
Mutators. Where the loot spawns is also random. So it's not every time you boot up the game, there is, the enemies aren't spawning at exactly the same locations, and the money that you find and collect is not in the same location either. Also, there's currency that you can use within the levels, right? To like, there are like item shops that you can use, and those have been in a lot of roguelikes.
And they very explicitly call a gameplay session a run, which is, it's within the lore, it makes sense. You are like supply collectors or whatever. You're doing a supply run, yada yada. But run is terminology used in roguelikes all the time, like in the abstract. Mm-hmm. Oh, I am a player. I am going to do a gameplay session. The start of my run, quote unquote, is where I spawn in. I come out of the bloodbath in Hades, right? And then the end of my run is when I finally die and I get reset to the bloodbath. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, yeah, even at the forefront, they're like, hey, you're doing a run. You're going to do a lot of runs. You're going to keep going out into the same area over and over and over again. And I don't know, I'm just not finding it as compelling this time around. Whereas, like, I think I guess compared to Left 4 Dead, every campaign was an arc of our heroes escaping something or just being victorious, right? No mercy. You start in like the streets and you go through the sewers and eventually you make it to the hospital. You get to you get to the rooftop, you get to the rooftop and then you take a helicopter and you escape. That's the arc. There doesn't really feel like there's that arc in Back 4 Blood, which hammers in the roguishness even more. Cause it's like, oh, you're playing this 4 levels. You go through like a barn and then you go and you find a diner and now you gotta like hold out at the diner while a bunch of people go into a school. And once that's done, you jump into a Humvee and you drive right back to camp. You don't leave the city. You just drive back to camp and everything starts over again. And that's kind of like very deflating.
It's interesting how they use narrative, right? That's kind of what you're circling around, I think. So Back 4 Blood is...
The rogue is tied into the narrative, yeah.
In Back 4 Blood, it's a linear game, right? You're just playing the game and things happen to the characters and you learn about them, like many games, right? But the roguelike, several roguelikes that we've seen, it's like, you're going to start an adventure, right? It's like, here's, you're Spelunky, here you go. You're going to be in a cave today, or, what's the other one that you've been talking about?
Hades.
Hades, right. Hades is, you're emerging out of the river Styx, layers, right?
Yeah.
So this one has a narrative that isn't supposed to be repeating itself, right? There are cutscenes that are kind of follow one linear path, and there isn't this idea in the game's story that you are kind of playing the same level on repeat, right? So there's a narrative cutscene that you can watch every single time and it's exactly the same and none of your choices affect the narrative cutscene. So it's trying to have, and every level it's between every level, right? So there is this overall narrative progression like you would see in a typical linear game, but this isn't a typical linear game. It's very repetitive and, requires that you restart frequently. So you might watch the cutscene once and then you're like hoping to get to that next cutscene, right? I feel like that's their ideal player, is like someone who is really enticed by by the narrative and is trying to beat the level so that they can watch the next movie, basically. But it's really frustrating when you see the same 15 seconds of a cutscene and you're waiting to skip it because you saw it, 2 days ago, and you keep replaying this level. Nobody wants that.
I think you're wrong about their ideal player. Because definitely, to me, what you described is the ideal player for a game like Uncharted or like a very narrative-focused cinematic game where it's like, yeah, I like this story, I like this cutscene, I want to play the gameplay that then brings me to a new cutscene. In general, everyone likes that. But that's not the core audience for this game. Like, I believe the core audience for this game is one, first-person shooter audience for sure, 2, Left 4 Dead lovers, and 3, roguelike players. Like, whoever likes this card stuff.
I agree that that's the target audience. I so much money must have gone into the production of these cutscenes, and there are so many different. It's broken into acts. Like from a writing perspective, I think that they really did pour a lot of resources into this, and they're hoping that that's going to be one of the things that continues to entice people and lead them. But what I'm saying isn't specific to this game, whereas what you're saying is specific to this game. I'm kind of describing how I think a lot of creators their ideal player is someone who's invested in the story if there is a game story. Do you want to talk more about the fatigue, though? I mean, like, is there, like, we've kind of
I would
down...
like to talk more about the fatigue. Like, that's really what we were trying to get at here. With roguelikes, I enjoy playing them, but I can very much feel when I've played too much of them. And that is also kind of the same to be said about live service games. Any games that sort of like just keep you in a general never-ending loop with like no sort of sense of like rising action, like falling action, closure, and things like that. So roguelikes, Hades is like kind of not a good example, but I think it's a good counterexample. So Hades like battles my fatigue by giving me like brand new conversations on every single run, brand new like overall narrative like progression through every run or at the start and end of every run. Whereas in other roguelikes, maybe say Get to the Orange Door, you're just like going through a level, doing some gameplay, getting to the end of the level, and then going through a level again. And it's just literally the same loop, like really quickly over and over and over, and the same levels over and over. And it just makes me at some point start to get this like existential question of like, what am I doing with my life? I'm just going through the same loop. And it's like, it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything different. And that creates like just a sense of fatigue. So I can't play Get to the Orange Door and then jump to Hades and then jump to Back 4 Blood. Like, I need an Uncharted in there. I need a Days Gone in there. I need something that opens, middles, and closes.
Right. It's one of the things that I have been struggling with as, I initially loved roguelikes. Like, when I first started playing them, it was like, whoa, this is my favorite genre. This is super interesting.
It's an amazing value proposition, right? In some cases, it's almost like infinite content.
Exactly. For sure. And I still enjoy, Monster Train every once in a while. I'll hop back into, or Slay the Spire before bed, that kind of energy. But with roguelikes, especially the combat-based ones, I feel like I don't know how good I am at the game. And that's one thing that really confuses me, because I don't know if I'm continuing to fail because that's just part of the experience of playing this game. Something like a Bloodborne type of game, I think everybody is aware already that they are going to be bad at that game, or that there's a choreography that you kind of have to memorize. But with roguelikes, I think that you're genuinely not sure sometimes how easy it's supposed to be, how accessible it's supposed to be, how much of it is actually based on your skill or the mutators, or even the fact that in some roguelikes, you get better, let's say, gear available to you the more runs that you've completed, right? For Hades,
go further, yeah.
Right, for Hades, you get different options of weaponry, and then you can modify that weaponry. And then they can balance that by making the game harder, and there are these, debuffs that you can start the run with. But I wish that, having played, scores of runs of Hades, I've only beaten Hades a couple of times, and I genuinely don't know if that's because I'm just not that good at that game, or if the game is supposed to be that hard. And then you talk to anybody else about it and they're like, yeah, I die all the time too. And it's like, yeah, but like, how much do you like, what percentage of runs would you say you complete? Is it like 5% or is it like 25%? Because that's a very different experience of playing. And I'm just like, at some point after I've become really familiar with the game and like the kinds of enemies, it just gets boring and like tedious to have to do the like first 2/3 of the game. And I wish I could almost just like pop into to the end of the game, and then continue to like just do that section of the run, you know? But it defeats the purpose because you have to make decisions throughout, and you know, often you have health that's like carried over, so it wouldn't make any sense to have a game like that. I'm just like, I don't know. I feel the fatigue is really what I'm getting at. I don't want to have to play 10 levels that I've played 80 times.
Yeah, and we understand why that's there, right? Typically, if a game has like a lot of production constraints or is just trying to like min-max the amount of content it can produce by tweaking different knobs and levers, that's what roguelike games have been all about in the last like 5 or so years. Probably like 5 to 10 actually. It's all about, hey, we have this like biome of a tile set, and we're now going to give you like 20 hours worth of content because you're going to run through the same biome and stuff. But you know, there is something to that. From the level design side of things, players and humans, just anyone, they note their journey through time space. So it's like time and space, you know, it took me 5 minutes to go from like the left side of this room to the right side of this room. Did I zigzag along the way? That sounds interesting. Did I just do it in a straight line? Okay, maybe that's not as interesting. But when we're seeing the same biome over and over, and like there are no distinguishing landmarks or moments, it just creates this sense of monotony, I think. And you lose the novelty that you were getting drip fed at whatever rate that game gave you, like new mutators and whatnot. And at this point, just the whole loop of getting like random novelty mutators just so that I could like work towards this like mildly bigger goal and blah, blah, blah. Like, I just want to save the world and be like, cool, I saved the world. Thank you, Spider-Man. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's unsatisfying. I mean, like, even when you do beat them, it's like, well, I beat it one time, and it was like with these very specific modifiers, and it's like I could either try to beat it again with the exact same modifiers and like, you know, replay the same exact thing I just played, to try to have some control, or I can you change the modifiers and try different things out, and then, you know, that kind of experimentation will lend itself to losing, you know. So there are different play styles that maybe can keep it interesting, or, you know, might actually
Hades does a
tedious.
good job of keeping it interesting, and I guess this is kind of just becoming the Hades highlight episode or something like that. But like most other roguelikes do not have this like, here is the post-ending cutscene. And that's what's cool about it, is like when you defeat the last boss in Hades, you get a ending cutscene, quote unquote, but that isn't actually the ending. It could be for some people, but it is actually just another point in the overall narrative, and now you need to like go ahead and like beat the game again and again, who knows how many times, and maybe there's other conditions, but there is like more story to go through, and I think that's like a unique aspect of that, whereas most games are just like, you made it to the end. If it's like I guess Spelunky maybe has a bit of a cool thing too, where like if you make it to the end of Spelunky, you did it, you got the treasure and you escaped the temple, and like, yay for you. But I guess also it's just kind of still light because you're going right back into the temple as soon as the cutscene's done.
Right. I can't believe we haven't addressed this yet, but when is there going to be an ape escape roguelike? Because I'm not tired for that. Let me catch some apes, procedurally generated apes.
Such a good idea. I don't know, like if it was like a mini open world type roguelike where it's just like oh no, you're at a Six Flags and like all the apes got loose, catch them, you only got, we mix it with Dead Rising a little bit where you only got like 72 hours before they nuke the Six Flags because the monkeys are going too crazy.
My gosh. Nukes and Six Flags, you're gonna be on like the NSA's watch list, dude.
I'm already there because of work searches.